Have you ever come back from a vacation and discovered that your team saved every major decision until you got back? Or maybe your phone starts blowing up the very second you're out of the office because everyone needs an answer. If so, you're not alone. Most advisors spend years learning how to solve client problems, but nobody teaches you that eventually your biggest challenge won't be the clients. It's going to be developing people who can solve problems without you. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important leadership lessons advisors never learn: how to create an environment where people stop waiting for answers and start thinking for themselves. Let's get started.
This is The Rare Advisor, a show for financial advisors who want to build and grow their practice through the use of a business model supercharged by recurring and repeatable events. The Rare Advisor is brought to you by the Advisor Protocol Consulting Team at USA Financial.
Welcome back to another episode of The Rare Advisor, where we help financial professionals create reoccurring and repeatable events that deepen relationships, elevate the client experience, and build referable practices. I'm your host, Grady, and in a recent episode, we explored the difference between delegating tasks and delegating responsibility. But that conversation naturally led us to a bigger question. The question was, once you've delegated responsibility, how do you build a team that actually takes ownership of it? Because understand, ownership doesn't just happen because you assign it. Ownership happens because of the environment leaderships create. Think about it this way. There comes a point in every advisor's career where your technical competency stops being your differentiator. You already know how to advise clients. You already know how to solve planning problems. You already know how to build relationships. But now you're thrust into the role of a leader. You may be leading other advisors. You may be leading CSAs. You may be leading operational professionals or marketing staff or administrative team members. The challenge is that many advisors are still trying to lead people the same way they were taught to learn and manage clients. Those are two completely different skill sets. Leadership is no longer about the ability to produce. It's about your ability to create an environment where others can produce. But the challenge is that most advisors were never set out to become leaders. They set out to become great advisors or maybe entrepreneurs, flexibility of schedule, maybe altruistically to help people out. But at some point, every growing practice reaches a stage where their technical expertise is no longer enough. And that's where the real leadership journey begins. And so today we're going to look at it through the lens of 5 leadership shifts that advisors should consider making if they want to get the most out of their leadership and create the right environment for their teams to excel. And so with the first leadership shift, we're going to focus on the leadership evolution that most advisors never ever saw coming. Many advisors believe that growth follows this simple path: more clients, more revenue, more staff. But the reality is that it's really a path that follows this trajectory: more clients, more complexity, greater leadership demands. Every successful advisor eventually encounters a painful realization. The systems that got you to 50 million don't get you to 250 million, or the ones that got you to 250 don't get you to 500, or the ones that got you to 500 don't get you to $1 billion. The leadership style that worked with one assistant doesn't work with 6 team members. And the reason is simple. As your organization grows, fewer problems are technical. More problems become people problems. Think about the conversations most lead advisors are having today. They're having conversations around accountability and communication, priorities, expectations, conflict, performance. Those are not financial planning problems. Those are leadership problems. And most advisors were never trained to solve them properly. Here's a key insight for you. Many advisors think that if I hire better people, these problems are just going to go away. And I hear it over and over and over again. Well, I just need to make better hires. I need to hire better talent. And there's some truth that hire the right people for the right job. But often the bigger question is, Am I creating the environment that allows good people to succeed? Let me say that again. Am I creating the environment that allows good people to succeed? Because even great people are going to struggle in a poor environment. So understand that once an advisor realizes and recognizes that leadership has become the next growth challenge, they often make an interesting discovery. The biggest obstacle isn't usually finding better people. It's realizing how their own habits may be unintentionally limiting the people they already have. You may be the bottleneck. You may be the roadblock. You may be the thing that's holding your team back. Which brings us to our second leadership shift that we're going to focus on today, which is why advisors accidentally create dependence. Think about that bottleneck. This is one of the biggest leadership traps that most advisors step into. Most advisors generally want empowered team members, yet unknowingly, they create the exact opposite. And why? Because they are successful problem solvers. Clients bring problems, advisors solve problems. This is how our profession rewards us, right? So you're a problem solver. The problem is the same behavior that creates successful advisors often creates weak teams and weak team members. Every time someone brings you a problem and you immediately solve it, you're getting stronger, but they're getting weaker. Not intentionally, but incrementally. Over time, your team learns that Aaron's the answer. Aaron makes all the decisions. Aaron handles all the exceptions, and Aaron's going to fix all the mistakes. Eventually, people stop thinking before they ask. Not because they can't, but because you've conditioned them not to. So here's a leadership reframe for you. When someone brings you a problem, try this. Don't ask, how do I solve this? Instead, ask, how do I help them learn to solve this? That's the shift from a producer to a leader. Now, also I understand that shifting into leadership is a difficult thing. So understand that this is going to take time and this is going to be a process. And every good thing that happens should have a process. So understand the shift from producer to leader is going to take time. So if dependence isn't usually a people problem, but an environment problem, the next question becomes, what specifically do great leaders do differently? And one of the biggest shifts starts with how they communicate. Think about this. How do you talk? What do you communicate? And as Steve Phillips always says, the words matter. And so this brings us to our third leadership shift, which is the idea around give direction, not directions. Let me say it again. Give direction, not directions. Quite frankly, this may be the most practical leadership principle in this entire episode. And it pairs really nicely. It actually pairs perfectly with the concept from our previous episode of delegating outcomes, not tasks. Delegating outcomes, not tasks. Unfortunately, many advisors spend their days giving directions. Do this, say this, send this, fix this, or handle it this way. Here's the problem. You become the operating system for your business. Nothing moves without your input. Great leaders do something different. Great leaders provide direction, not directions. And direction is created through 4 key elements: vision, purpose, boundaries, and trust. Vision, purpose, boundaries, and trust. Vision. Where are we trying to go? Purpose. Why does it matter? So by saying around the why, you got to know your why. Boundaries. What constraints exist? And trust. I believe you can figure out the path. This is where ownership begins, because ownership is impossible when every step has already been prescribed. So here's some coaching questions for you so you can build up your team. So instead of saying, here's what I would do, try saying something like this. What options do you see? What outcomes are we trying to achieve? What would happen if we did nothing, which is powerful? Sometimes your team members may have something that they deem to be urgent or important that may be neither, or things that may be important but not urgent, and you need to level set. And then lastly, this is a great one, and it fits into a methodology that I believe strongly in. What do you recommend? There's a methodology that I'll get into in a separate episode. We'll talk about the 1-3-1 methodology of problem solving with your team members. But for the sake of today, you could ask the simple question, what do you recommend? So the questions again are, what options do you see? What outcomes are we trying to achieve? What would happen if we did nothing? And what do you recommend? Those questions develop judgment. That's an important word, judgment. And leadership development is really just judgment development. But simply changing the way we communicate isn't enough. If we want people to think, act, and lead with greater ownership, we have to create an environment that supports those behaviors long after the conversation is over. And so that brings us to our leadership shift number 4, the 4 conditions that create ownership. Many leaders want ownership. Few create conditions required for ownership. Ownership is not about a personality trait. It's an environmental response. So let's look at these 4 conditions. Condition number 1 is clarity. People need to know what success looks like, what they're responsible for. That's a big one. What am I responsible for? And what decisions they can make. Understand that ambiguity creates hesitation. Clarity creates confidence. Condition number 2, authority. One of the biggest frustrations employees experience is being held accountable for outcomes they can't influence. Ownership requires decisions, rights, and people need to know, where can I make decisions without asking permission? Without authority, there can never be true accountability. Think about that. Without authority, there can never be true accountability. Condition number 3 is safety. Nobody grows if every mistake becomes a crisis. I deal with some advisors in the past that are overly critical of mistakes. Understand there is a need for people to fail forward and to make mistakes. If the intent is correct, then mistakes can happen and we can learn from them and we can grow. If there's bad intent, that's a whole different scenario. So leaders must create space for experimentation, learning, and here's an important phrase, recoverable mistakes. If every decision gets second guessed, all initiative is going to disappear. People will stop trying to step out. They're going to wait till you guide them. And condition number 4, meaning. People own what they understand. A CSA doesn't schedule meetings. They create confidence. An operations person doesn't just process paperwork. They protect client trust. When people understand who benefits from their work, the engagement changes dramatically. Again, this comes back to the idea of the why. Why am I doing this? What is the impact that my work has on us as an organization? Now, understand, all of this sounds great in theory. I'm sure there's many people listening to this episode. They're like, okay, great. But how do you know whether you're actually creating that kind of environment? Well, fortunately, there's a simple test that reveals more about your leadership than almost anything else. And that brings us to our leadership shift number 5, the ultimate test of leadership. And I often ask this question from teams that are looking for that freedom of schedule or they're looking to really empower their teams. And so often I'll ask a simple question, and it's this. If you disappeared for 2 weeks, what would happen? Now, some advisors will say, oh, the place will burn down or come to a screeching halt or fall apart. But it's strange. I have more and more advisors that will immediately think, you know what, we'd survive. But when I push them deeper, would decisions continue being made? Would problems continue getting solved? Would people move forward with confidence or move confidently towards objectives? Or would everything pile up until you returned? Now, the answer that you get almost always will tell you everything you need to know about the leadership environment that you've created. Now, it may be that this is not a black and white issue. It may be, well, most stuff will get done, but some things will wait. Well, what are those things? And why are they waiting? The idea here is because understand that what we're trying to build and what you should try to build as a successful leader is not dependence, because the goal of leadership isn't dependence. The goal isn't being indispensable either. The goal isn't being the smartest person in the room. The goal isn't creating a room full of people capable, or I'm sorry, the goal is to create a room full of capable people that are capable of succeeding without you. And that's essentially the leadership paradox. The better the leader you become, the less important you become in the daily execution. That's not a threat. That's the goal. And understand what I said again. The less important you become to daily execution, it doesn't mean you're not important and that you are not running the organization. It just means that you don't have to be involved in every decision on a day-to-day basis. And quite frankly, most advisors have voiced to me that that is the goal that they have for their practice, is they don't want to have to be dealing with the minutia. They want to truly have employees that can handle it, because truly great leaders don't create followers. They create more leaders. And that's really the lesson underneath this entire conversation we had today. Leadership isn't measured by how much depends on you on a given day, week, month, year. It's measured in how much continues to succeed because of the environment you've created. As advisors, you spend years developing technical expertise, but eventually your success becomes less about your plans you've created and more about the people you've developed. Because leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's not about being involved in every decision, and it's certainly not about being the person everyone depends on. True leadership begins when your team understands the vision, embraces the purpose, operates within clear boundaries, and has the confidence to act without waiting for permission. When that happens, you've moved beyond managing people and you've started developing leaders. And that's when your business gains the ability to grow beyond you. Because at the end of the day, the environment that you create determines the behavior you get. If you create a dependency-driven environment, you'll get dependency. If you create an ownership-driven environment, you'll get ownership. And that may be the single most important leadership lesson most advisors were never taught. Thanks again for joining us for another edition of The Rare Advisor. If you found today's conversation helpful, make sure to share, make sure to like and subscribe, and share it with another advisor who may be navigating the same leadership journey. And as always, as I always say, when the why is clear, the how becomes easy. So never lose sight of your why.
This information is for licensed financial professionals only and is not intended for use in soliciting sales from the public. The views expressed represent the opinions of the presenter or their featured guest, not necessarily those of USA Financial or its affiliated subsidiaries. Industry references are generic and not intended to represent actions or beliefs of any individual or entity. Content is only presented to illustrate general principles, beliefs, or ideas and should not be construed as legal or regulatory advice. Trademark and copyright protected. USA Financial and Affiliates.